The day began like any other for James Carter, a retired Army veteran who prided himself on his disciplined routine. The morning air was crisp, and the sun cast a golden hue over the city streets as James made his way to the local train station. With a neatly pressed jacket adorned with the insignias of his military service, he walked with the quiet dignity of a man who had dedicated his life to serving his country. Though his body bore the scars of war, his spirit remained unbroken, fueled by an unwavering belief in justice and equality. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. James boarded the train, clutching a small book he had been meaning to read. The carriage was sparsely populated, a handful of commuters absorbed in their newspapers, a young couple lost in conversation, and a mother soothing her restless toddler. James found a seat by the window, hoping to enjoy the fleeting peace of the ride. As the train began its journey, the driver's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the first stop. James barely noticed the announcement, engrossed in the pages of his book. But it wasn't long before his tranquility was shattered. The train lurched to a halt at the next station, and the doors slid open. A man in his early 50s, clad in the uniform of a train driver, stepped into the carriage. His eyes scanned the passengers until they landed on James. "Hey, you!" the driver barked, his tone sharp and accusing. "You're not supposed to be here!" James looked up, startled. "Excuse me?" he replied, his voice calm but tinged with confusion. "I said, you're not supposed to be here," the driver repeated, his words cutting through the silence like a blade. "This isn't a free ride. Get off my train." The other passengers turned their attention to the unfolding scene, their curiosity giving way to discomfort. James frowned, his grip tightening on the book. "I have a valid ticket," he said, reaching into his pocket to retrieve it. The driver waved him off dismissively. "I don't care about your ticket. People like you think you can do whatever you want. Not on my train." The insinuation was clear, and the air grew heavy with unspoken tension. James felt a familiar knot of anger and frustration rise in his chest, but he forced himself to remain composed. Years of military training had taught him the value of restraint, even in the face of blatant disrespect. "Sir," James began, his voice steady, "I served this country for over 20 years. I've earned the right to sit on this train just like anyone else." The driver sneered. "I don't care if you served in the circus. You're not welcome here. Now get off, or I'll call security." The words hung in the air, a bitter echo of countless injustices James had faced throughout his life. He rose slowly from his seat, his tall frame commanding attention. The other passengers watched in stunned silence, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and shame. Without another word, James stepped off the train, his head held high. But this was far from over. As the train pulled away, James stood on the platform, his mind racing. He could have walked away, resigned to yet another instance of prejudice and ignorance. Instead, he chose a different path. A path that would demand courage, creativity, and the kind of resolve that had carried him through the darkest days of his military service. James walked to the station's customer service desk and requested to speak with a manager. When the supervisor arrived, James recounted the incident in meticulous detail, his voice unwavering. He provided the driver's description, the time of the encounter, and even the train number. The manager, visibly alarmed, promised to investigate the matter immediately. But James wasn't done. He knew that systemic change required more than a formal complaint. That evening, he penned an open letter, eloquently detailing his experience and the broader implications of racism in public spaces. The letter, shared across social media platforms, quickly gained traction. Thousands of people resonated with James's words, expressing outrage and solidarity. His story became a rallying cry for those who had endured similar treatment, a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Within days, the incident made headlines. News outlets across the country picked up the story, and James was invited to share his perspective in interviews. He spoke with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his actions on the train, emphasizing the importance of accountability and education in addressing racism. The public outcry reached the train company's executive board, which issued a formal apology to James and announced an internal investigation. The driver was suspended pending the outcome, and the company pledged to implement mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees. But James's impact didn't end there. Inspired by the overwhelming support he received, he decided to channel his experience into advocacy. He partnered with local organizations to launch a campaign promoting racial equality and respect in public spaces. The campaign included workshops, community forums, and a powerful video series featuring personal stories of resilience and change. One of the most poignant moments of the campaign occurred during a town hall meeting, where James shared the stage with a diverse panel of speakers. Among them was a young woman who had been on the train that day. She recounted how witnessing James's calm defiance had inspired her to confront her own biases and become an active ally in the fight against discrimination. Months later, James received a letter from the train company informing him that the driver had been terminated. The letter acknowledged James's courage in coming forward and thanked him for sparking meaningful change within the organization. Along with the letter came an invitation to serve as a consultant for their newly established Diversity Council. James accepted the invitation, viewing it as an opportunity to turn a painful experience into a catalyst for progress. He worked closely with the council, sharing his insights and helping to shape policies that would ensure no one else would face the kind of humiliation he had endured. In time, James's story became a symbol of hope and transformation. What began as an act of prejudice on a quiet train ride evolved into a movement that challenged the status quo and inspired countless individuals to stand up for what was right. Through his unwavering commitment to justice, James proved that even in the face of adversity, one person could make a difference. And so, every time James boarded a train, he carried with him not just the weight of his experiences, but the knowledge that he had turned a moment of injustice into a legacy of change. For James, the journey was far from over. It had only just begun. As the days turned into weeks, James Carter's life transformed in ways he could never have anticipated. What had begun as a moment of indignity on a train platform had blossomed into a national conversation about systemic racism, individual responsibility, and the power of standing up for what is right. Yet James found himself wrestling with a complex mixture of emotions. On one hand, he was proud to have turned his pain into purpose, yet on the other, he remained haunted by the thought of how deeply ingrained such biases were in society. James's military training had taught him that battles are won not just on the front lines, but in preparation, strategy, and persistence. He realized that his role as an advocate was no different. The momentum surrounding his story provided a platform, but platforms without direction often faltered. Determined to make a lasting impact, James began to expand his efforts, ensuring that the energy sparked by his story didn't dissipate, but evolved into tangible change. One of James's first initiatives was to connect with educators. He believed firmly that racism wasn't an innate trait, but a learned behavior, often reinforced by ignorance and stereotypes. To combat this, he proposed a pilot program in local schools that would focus on teaching empathy, cultural history, and the value of diversity. Working with educators, community leaders, and psychologists, James helped design a curriculum that balanced academic rigor with emotional engagement. The program wasn't limited to history lessons about civil rights or the struggle against segregation. Instead, it emphasized storytelling as a means to foster understanding. Students were encouraged to share their own experiences, listen to those of their peers, and explore how prejudices could form and be dismantled. James often visited classrooms himself, sharing his journey and answering the earnest, sometimes difficult questions posed by young minds. His presence had a magnetic quality, and he quickly became a role model, not just for students, but for teachers as well. Outside the classroom, James focused on building bridges between different parts of the community. He organized town hall meetings that brought together people from diverse racial, economic, and social backgrounds. These gatherings weren't always comfortable. Raw emotions often surfaced, and difficult truths were spoken. But James saw these moments of discomfort as necessary for growth. He facilitated the discussions with the same calm authority he had shown on the train that day, ensuring that every voice was heard and every perspective acknowledged. One particularly transformative town hall took place in a predominantly white neighborhood known for its conservative leanings. Many attendees admitted they had come out of curiosity or skepticism, rather than support. James, aware of the potential for hostility, opened the meeting with a simple question. When was the last time you felt invisible? He allowed the room to sit in silence for a moment before continuing, sharing his own story in vivid detail. By the end of the night, Many of the attendees who had entered with crossed arms and guarded expressions approached James to thank him for his candor. Several admitted that his story had challenged their assumptions in ways they hadn't anticipated. While James was making strides locally, his influence was beginning to reach far beyond his immediate community. Media outlets continued to seek him out, eager to follow the developments in his journey. National organizations began inviting him to speak at conferences, and his calendar quickly filled with engagements. James accepted these invitations thoughtfully, ensuring that each opportunity aligned with his mission of fostering meaningful dialogue and action. One particularly memorable event took place in Washington, D.C., where James was asked to deliver a keynote speech at a major summit on social justice and equity. Standing on the grand stage, his military medals gleaming under the bright lights, James spoke not as a victim but as a warrior for change. His words carried the weight of his experiences and the hope of a better future. By the time he finished, the audience was on its feet, applauding not just his eloquence but his unwavering resolve. Amid these public triumphs, James continued to grapple with personal challenges. The attention his story had garnered came with scrutiny, criticism, and even threats. Not everyone supported his efforts, and some accused him of seeking fame or exploiting the incident for personal gain. James met these accusations with the same quiet dignity he had shown on the train, refusing to let negativity derail his mission. One night, as James sifted through his emails, he came across a message that stopped him in his tracks. It was from a man named Tom, who identified himself as the train driver's brother. The email was brief but heartfelt. Tom apologized for his brother's actions, explaining that their family had long struggled with prejudice and that he had often clashed with his sibling over such attitudes. He thanked James for his courage, expressing hope that the incident might serve as a wake-up call for his brother and others like him. James sat back in his chair, the weight of the message sinking in. He had often spoken about the need for accountability, but this email reminded him of the complexity of human behavior. He decided to respond, not with anger or condemnation, but with compassion. In his reply, James thanked Tom for his honesty and encouraged him to continue being a positive influence in his family. The exchange marked a turning point for James, reaffirming his belief that change, while difficult, was always possible. As James's work gained traction, he began to notice a ripple effect. Other veterans reached out to him, sharing their own experiences of discrimination and seeking advice on how to channel their frustrations into productive action. James saw an opportunity to create a network, a coalition of individuals who had served their country and were now committed to serving their communities in a different capacity. He called it Operation Equity, a nod to his military roots and his new mission. Operation Equity quickly grew into a nationwide movement, with chapters forming in cities across the country. The organization provided resources, training, and support for veterans looking to become advocates for social justice. Its members, united by their shared values and experiences, became a powerful force for change, tackling issues ranging from racial inequality to housing discrimination to voter suppression. One of Operation Equity's most ambitious projects was a cross-country tour, during which James and other members traveled to underserved communities to host workshops, volunteer, and engage in dialogue. The tour was both exhausting and exhilarating, and it reinforced James's belief in the resilience and potential of the human spirit. At each stop, he encountered stories of hardship and hope, of despair and determination. These stories, in turn, fueled his own resolve. As the years passed, James's legacy continued to grow. The incident on the train, once a painful memory, became a pivotal moment that defined his life's work. Yet James remained humble, always emphasizing that his achievements were the result of collective effort and shared vision. He often reflected on the words of one of his military mentors: "True leadership isn't about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in your charge." James had taken those words to heart, dedicating himself to the well-being of his community and his country. One quiet evening, as James sat on his porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this point. He thought about the train driver who had sparked it all, a man whose ignorance and prejudice had unwittingly set in motion a wave of change. James didn't know what had become of the driver, but he hoped that somewhere along the way, the man had found the courage to confront his own biases and grow. James's thoughts turned to the countless people who had joined him on this journey. Students, activists, veterans, and ordinary citizens who had been inspired to take a stand. He knew that the road ahead was still long and fraught with challenges, but he also knew that progress was possible. After all, he had seen it firsthand. And so, as the stars began to dot the night sky, James resolved to keep moving forward. For every train ride, every conversation, every moment of resistance and resilience, he carried with him the unshakable belief that one person, armed with courage and conviction, could indeed make a difference. James Carter's story became more than a tale of personal resilience. It grew into a blueprint for how to respond to systemic challenges with purpose and determination. As his work continued, James found himself increasingly in demand, not just as an advocate but as a mentor. Organizations, schools, and even corporations sought his guidance on how to confront bias and foster meaningful change. James, though humbled by the attention, maintained his focus on grassroots impact. He believed that lasting progress began with individuals and communities, not just policies or institutional promises. One of the most unexpected opportunities came when a film producer approached James with the idea of turning his story into a documentary. At first, James hesitated. He had never sought fame, and the thought of his life being dissected on screen felt invasive. But the producer convinced him that the project could amplify his message and inspire even more people to take action. Reluctantly, James agreed, on the condition that the documentary would highlight not just his story, but the broader movement for justice that had grown around it. The production process was grueling yet rewarding. The cameras followed James through his daily life, leading workshops, meeting with community leaders, and spending quiet moments with his family. The filmmakers also interviewed those who had been touched by James's work, from students who had participated in his school programs to veterans who had joined Operation Equity. Their testimonials painted a vivid picture of the ripple effects of James's actions, showcasing how one man's stand against injustice had sparked a nationwide wave of awareness and activism. When the documentary premiered, it was met with critical acclaim. Titled The Train of Change, the film captured the hearts of audiences across the country. Its powerful storytelling and raw emotion resonated with viewers, many of whom wrote to James, sharing how the film had moved them to reflect on their own biases or take action in their communities. The documentary even earned several awards, but for James, its greatest achievement was its ability to inspire others. The success of the documentary brought with it new opportunities. James was invited to testify before Congress about his experiences and the broader issues of racial discrimination in public spaces. Standing before the nation's lawmakers, he spoke with the same conviction and clarity that had carried him through countless battles, both on the battlefield and in civilian life. His testimony helped push forward legislation aimed at improving anti-discrimination training and accountability measures in the transportation industry. Despite these national achievements, James remained deeply connected to his local community. He continued to mentor young people, often inviting them to join him on his projects so they could see firsthand the impact of advocacy. He encouraged them to think critically, act with courage, and always strive to leave the world better than they found it. As James reflected on the journey that had brought him here, he felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for the challenges he had faced, but for the opportunities they had given him to grow and make a difference. The road ahead was still uncertain, but James knew one thing for sure. He would never stop fighting for the values he held dear. His mission was far from over, and his story was still being written. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us. What are your thoughts on a racist train driver kicking out a black veteran? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.